It's crazy to think that at the time of making this video, it's been about 2 years since Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. For Ukrainians, 2024 marks 10 years of Russian occupation since the Crimean peninsula was annexed in 2014.
Large groups of pro-Russia troops surrounding Ukrainian bases, ordering their forces off of them so they can occupy them. The international warning to Russia to end its invasion is being ignored.
But when it comes to the more recent full-scale invasion, Lithuania has been one of the most vocal countries in its support for Ukraine, reminding the world of the need to repel Russian aggression. One thing you'll hear over and over again in Lithuanian news, as well as international news about Lithuania, is that many people in the country hold the strong belief that Russia wants to capture the Baltics too.
The pressure is on to get Lithuanian recruits up to snuff too.
The Russian activities in Crimea and in eastern Ukraine show that it's not only that Russia possesses the capability to harm us, but they also might have the intentions.
This is something I wanted to unpack and examine for today's video.
Concerned that their countries could be the next Russian target. That's a product of some of their interactions with Russia recently, but also a product of their history. Lithuania was occupied by the Soviet Union, then briefly by Nazi Germany, and then the Soviet Union again for 5 decades.
Yes, most people in Lithuania are convinced that Russia has its eyes on the Baltic nations. I think it's common knowledge by now, but for the 1% of viewers who are unaware, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia were all occupied by the Soviet Union, as was Belarus. Each country was considered its own Soviet Socialist Republic, and so Lithuania was the Lithuanian Soviet Socialist Republic, and was essentially one of the constituent republics of the Soviet Union. This was the case between 1944 and 1990. Lithuania regained its independence in 1990 and has since joined many Western institutions, the European Union, the Eurozone, the Schengen Zone, and perhaps most importantly in this discussion, NATO, or the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. I think the fact that Lithuania and the other Baltic countries were once part of the Soviet Union is what causes so many to fear that Russian occupation could happen once again. For older generations of Lithuania, life under Soviet occupation was a lived reality, something that, for them, probably doesn't feel like it was too long ago. Unfortunately, it only seems to get worse. Reported by LRT in June 2022, there was a draft bill submitted to the Russian State Duma that called for repealing a resolution made by the Soviet Union State Council that recognized Lithuania's independence. The bill was drafted by a member of the United Russia Party, who noted that in March 1991, a referendum was held in Russia expressing support in preserving the Soviet Union as a single state. While it doesn't look like that draft bill was adopted, it was enough proof that some people in the Russian government wanted to see Lithuania lose its independence. In all likelihood, that particular piece of news was a political stunt in response to a Lithuanian parliament resolution recognizing Russia's war against Ukraine as genocide and Russia as a terrorist state. The reality of whether or not Russia wants to capture Lithuania and the other Baltic states is likely not binary. Yes or no, black or white. Life is rarely like that. There's a good chance that many Russians would be privately against such a move, already seeing the waste of lives and resources in the attempt to capture Ukraine. Of course, there are no doubt many others who want to see the glory of the Soviet Union restored and to see Russia once again a major player on the global stage. One phrase that sums up this idea is nationalist imperialism. Some sources state that Putin never accepted the loss of Russian prestige that followed the end of the Cold War. I think this is probably the driving force behind any intentions Russia has for occupying its neighboring countries. Of course, it then uses false justifications to act. With the 2014 annexation of Crimea, Putin insisted that Russia had annexed Crimea to protect ethnic Russians from quote-unquote far-right extremists, who it claimed had overthrown Ukraine's President Yanukovych. In the current invasion that began in 2022, Putin said it was being done to, quote, protect the people that are subjected to abuse and genocide from the Kiev regime, and to, quote, demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. In reality, many would say that both moves were in response to the fact that Ukraine was moving more towards a Western democracy outside of Russia's sphere of influence. Still, we can see that Putin is happy to make up any kind of excuse and false justification in order to invade neighboring countries. My guess is that for Estonia and Latvia, it would be to protect Russian ethnic minorities, while in Lithuania, it would have to do with protecting the Russian exclave of Kaliningrad and ensuring it remains connected to Belarus.
Tensions have increased because the country is implementing a ban of goods traveling by rail between mainland Russia and the Russian enclave, Kaliningrad.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has recently threatened Latvia with repercussions due to Riga's policies towards its Russian-speaking minority.
He said Moscow would adjust relations with Riga in response to its treatment of Russian-speaking minorities.
So, in terms of moral justification for an invasion of Lithuania, there's more than enough there to make a case, even if all of it is false or just overblown. So you might be thinking, sure, even if Russia wants to invade Lithuania, Latvia, or Estonia, it must be so worn down by now with its Ukrainian offensive. Yes, that might be the case for now. According to LRT, in Lithuania, German analysts assess that Russia may be ready for war with NATO in 5 to 8 years. The media outlet asked a US general about this, who said that he agrees with the German assessment, but says it could be even shorter. He says that number is based on an analysis of how long it will take Russia to rebuild their destroyed military, retool their defense industry, and catch back up on ammunition. These are things that they would need to fight against NATO. I don't want to put an exact number on it, but you could say it's anywhere between 3 and 8 years, depending on what we do with sanctions. For me, it seems absolutely crazy to think that Russia would even entertain the idea of invading a NATO member. At the heart of the NATO alliance is the principle of collective defense, and that an attack on one member nation is an attack on all.
America is fully prepared with our NATO allies to defend every single inch of NATO territory.
So if you really want to get dark with this, it feels like, at least to me, that an attempted invasion or attack on any NATO country by Russia is essentially World War III, with both sides, NATO and Russia, armed with nuclear weapons. So to assess whether or not Russia would try to capture Lithuania or the other Baltic states, one has to ask whether or not Putin would dare to start a war against forces from all of NATO.
Since 2004, we are NATO member, and we have very clear assurances, which were repeated many times also by President Joe Biden, that Article 5 is sacred, rock solid.
It seems absurd that it could happen, but at the same time, many thought a full-scale invasion of Ukraine would be absurd as well. So to wrap it up, with Lithuania and the other Baltic states as members of the NATO alliance, it feels less likely that Russia would dare invade, but in this day and age, anything is possible, unfortunately.
Since the very beginning, since the regaining of our independence, we realized that Russia is a long-term threat.
But it's the exact reason why Ukraine needs to win, to set an example and show that borders of independent countries should be respected. But what do you think? What are the chances that Russia attempts to invade Lithuania in the next 10 years? Share your thoughts by leaving a comment. For the Lithuanian word of the day, let's go with karas, which means war. Karas. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.